So I just kind of repeat my intro from earlier. So I'm Chris. I come from a technical background, but one of the things that I've been trying to do probably for the past 10 years is translate technology and technical concepts into things that are much more easily understood. Part of that inspiration is I have a very non-technical wife. She's fantastic. She's much more intelligent than me in many other respects, but she doesn't understand tech at all. And my kids don't understand tech, despite them being the latest generation. So it's always, for me, it's like, can I explain it to my wife and kids in a way that helps them understand? Still today, when she talks to her friends, I'm just an IT guy. That's literally the description of me. Go for it. So I think for me, the interesting thing from Dennis and Ben, from Dennis and Ben is the value that's locked up in your businesses today is the data, is the intelligence you've got. And it's a challenge I had with Rachel when I first started talking to Rachel last year about joining the Grafter. One of the questions that kind of in a roundabout way she asked me was, why don't I set up my own consultancy business? And so my view is, for me, setting up a consultancy business, I've thought about it in the past, and the challenge has always been the bottleneck is me. Because if I was to set up a consultancy business, I'd be doing things that I've got knowledge of in my head. And I have no idea how to scale that. And in the past, there wasn't a way of scaling it other than meeting clever friends and saying, right, we're going to go to business together. I'll take some of the work, you'll take some of the work, but you're still capped at how much work you can do because there's only so many hours in a week. The beautiful thing, I think that's the beautiful opportunity about LLMs and Gen AI today is how do I capture that knowledge and how do I productize that knowledge? And I think to your point, Mike, in terms of, or actually a couple of the points there, and Tushar as well, is extracting that, and it's not as complex as it might have seemed there. So I want to just explain some of the concepts that Dennis was talking about there. So a lot of the code-like structures you saw is a JSON format. You don't need to care about what that actually means. What it is text that's machine readable. It's categorized in a way the machines can read it really easily and make sense. If you open up, the Times today and read an article, that makes sense to you. It's structured in a way that's structured for human knowledge. JSON and those sort of objects and the semantic graph data and things like that are structured in a way that computers can read and categorize it really well. You don't have to do the complicated bits. So the beautiful thing about some of this stuff is leveraging AI to help you leverage AI. So throw an article, throw a piece of text into AI and say, what I need from this is a machine-readable structure from this. And it will do that hard work for you. So you don't necessarily need to be technical. You might need to go through a couple of iterations because sometimes it will come back with garbage. And the one thing I've been using AI a lot for is asking AI, how can I ask AI better questions? And it seems really, really meta, but it is exactly that. It's, I need to be able to give Rachel a way of talking to AI that gives me a similar response. So what prompt should I use?
In my language.
So before I start with this, I kind of want to break it back down to basics. When we were talking with Rachel about how are we going to leverage AI within the business, I don't care whether it's AI, and a lot of the time we throw AI at it, and actually it's just a coding problem or it's just a process problem. AI is not the answer to everything. So from the start, we were very much, okay, what are we actually trying to achieve here? And for me, it was to scale the business, to scale what we're doing in terms of the programs, we need self-service access. There's always going to be a need for, here is a human holding your hand, walking you through things. That's expensive, and not everyone can or wants to pay for that. So you need a lower cost self-service access so we can be more accessible to a larger part of the market. Accessibility isn't just about cost, it's also people running smaller businesses, people running more kind of, not charities, but more charitable business that kind of do good businesses that aren't making lots of money, they're not looking for 8-figure exits, but they are looking at ways of optimizing it. Second part of this is scaling without physically cloning Rachel. Honestly, one's enough.
The half said the same thing.
And we've joked numerous times about having a virtual Rachel, and we've all come to the conclusion that would also be a horrible thing. So it's about scaling the challenges of what's stuck in our heads and making that something that's scalable, making that easy accessible without hitting the 40, 50, 60-hour week limits. And then all part of this is also having that as a lower cost option. It's all kind of interweaved in the same thing there. Why isn't that not giving me anything else? There we go. Ultimately, we want it to be more accessible to more people. So we want to be able to attach to a wider market. We're also stuck in, if we're selling services that require hand-holding, we're stuck within certain geographies and certain time zones. We can't take on an APAC market because Rachel's not going to want to do calls at 2 in the morning. I'm not going to want to do the business diagnostics at 2 in the morning. I've done that in the past and it's not fun. So it's about having a broader spread of where you can sell your products and services into as well. So this is kind of the requirements that we had coming into this. So what are we looking at here? So we wanted to extend the AI tools with examples of our work. So we wanted to, and this is where I can't remember if it was Dennis or your point, Ben, about if you go to AI consultants out there, they're going to say, you want to make it do what you need to do? You're going to go and train your own AI. Yep. And that's a terrible idea because as soon as the AIs improve, you don't need to know the details, but I'm sure you may have seen things like OpenAI talks about ChatGPT 3.5 and then 4 and then 4.0 and then 0A. And there's so many different variances now. As soon as you bake in your custom version, you are immediately out of date. So we need a layer that sits on top of the AIs so I can add our intelligence to it and I can chop and change the AIs. I'm a big fan of using ChatGPT just because it's what I know. I'm absolutely guilty of using it because it's what I know. No other reason whatsoever. There's no scientific reason that it's better or good or whatever. It's just what I'm familiar with. Rach, I know, uses DeepSeek quite a lot. And sometimes we'll have clashes. We'll have both used the same prompt and get completely different answers. And it's always interesting from that perspective. But we haven't been doing this level of adding our intelligence on top of it. We want to be able to plug in our own various pieces of human-created work. Rachel's got a fantastic portfolio of stuff that she's built in the past, blogs, books, playbooks, all the rest of it, articles, social media posts that are a great source of information. Now, at the moment, they're very much structured in human format. So part of this process is going through and translating that from human format into machine-readable formats. Again, we can leverage the AIs to help us do that. And then this is aspirational. This is something we're not doing yet today, but I think this is, you may have hear things like agentic AI, which sounds like a very fancy thing, but this is where, so basically agentic AI is you get agents that go and do some of these connection works to you. It does a lot more than that. I'm oversimplifying there, but agentic can then say, right, we do a bunch of our workshops in Miro. I don't want to have to go to Miro and take a PDF of every single every piece of content within that Miro board. I want an agent to go and do that connection for me. So that's when we get into this. This is aspirational for us today. We're not doing this yet. We absolutely will be. Does this man write? And then the last thing is kind of, as I said, starting designing and refining the AI prompts. Don't build this stuff and then kind of high-five each other around the office and say, right, we built it, and then go off and start using it and never look at it again. You need to be constantly refining these because the way that AIs respond to you and the way that AIs respond to your feedback and your prompts changes over time. You may have noticed this, and this was in the news recently, whereas ChatGPT became a little bit sycophantic recently. You're amazing, Chris. I love that idea, even if it was a terrible idea. So they're always refining those prompts, and you don't necessarily want that in. You want to create this layer that helps you create your own personality within this. We've done that in a couple of pieces of work where we feed AI output back into the AI in a couple of different generations. The thing to understand about AI prompts is that AI is a little bit like my kids. If I give them 3 instructions, they forget 2.5 of those. So it's the same thing with prompts. In fact, I love the way my daughter is developing at the moment is really similar to the way I see AIs developing as well. So when you ask her to spell something, she hears her brothers spelling their names. And it sounds an invocation. So when you ask her to spell her name, she's called Lyra. How do you spell Lyra? L-Y-M-R-K-D. Because there's sounds that her brothers make. And it sounds like that she's learning from repeating things. Same way, everyone's done this, everyone's seen this and done this. Ask AI to count how many R's in strawberry. And it's because it's never been asked that question before. So it's going in at a pure AI level, which is analyzing it and breaking it up into chunks. And it's thinking, well, if I analyze it in a way that I think I should be analyzing it, there's 2 R's in strawberry. There's one at the beginning, and there's probably one in the middle. So you get this mistake. And it is interesting, if anyone's got kids, kind of comparing that development of AI with how your children develop. The earlier years, as you get into later years, it's very much different. But I think the earlier years, it feels very familiar to me anyway. So in any of this stuff, we don't want to remain it static. You absolutely need that continuous improvement model, continuously revisiting this, revising it, and it will get better. The first time you put it in, you'll have a leap of kind of, this is amazing, and then every iteration will be a little bit better. Don't let that put you off, because those minimal improvements, it's like compound investment. 1% growth over a year is a huge amount of investment. It is a huge amount of growth. Yeah, and like I said, use AI to test and build too. So actually feed outputs back into AI to say, is this any good? The one thing, I don't have a slide that talks about this, but one thing Dennis was talking about personas. I'm a huge fan of personas. If you've worked with me, you might hear me talking about ICP and building out those personas into real personalities. I'd highly recommend going through that yourselves and actually putting a personality against the people you sell to. The reason that becomes really powerful is because you can start testing your hypotheses. So you actually say to AI, the very brand new chats, say, you are Tracy, you are a CIO in a Fortune 500 company, you've got this budget, you've got these challenges, here is what I'm trying to sell to you. What do you care about? And you give AI the personality. It's not going to be perfect, but it's a great way of testing that before you pick up the phone to Tracy, the CIO who you want to target, and say, I've got this idea. And she responds, that's a really stupid idea, don't phone me again.
That's
so
actually one of the use cases of this type of work, by the way.
Yes.
Just to simulate, for example, talking to
Yes.
humans, right? And
Yeah.
it's actually really good.
Yep. Again, if you've worked with me on certain things, you know that I'm a massive fan of role plays. I hate doing role plays, but I love asking other people to do role plays. It's a great way of just, again, testing hypotheses. If you've got something new that you want to take to market, the first time you test that, you don't necessarily want that to be with a customer or a prospect. So using the best scenario there is using friendly prospects, friendly customers you already know, obviously. Second best thing is using colleagues. Third best thing is using AI. And I definitely leverage AI first as you start building and testing your hypotheses. This can work with anything. This isn't just around consultancy or product. It can work with all sorts of different things within life. It's a great way of, so long as you're telling the AI to have a certain personality, it's a great way of kind of framing that. It limits the scope of what the AI is looking at. So if you tell it you're a CIO, it's not going to start pulling out, details about finance and management reporting and all the rest of it. It's going to focus on, okay, I'm a CIO. This is what I care about.
And they're quite good at that.
Yeah, they really are. And that's for me. I think that for me, that's a bit of a secret sauce, is leveraging AI not to do entire content, but leverage it much more as a consultant for kind of bouncing ideas off of. I've kind of already talked about that. So what does that mean that we're building within the Grafter, and how does that help? How is this actually helping us scale what we're doing? Firstly is the business diagnostic, and there's going to be a number of iterations. I think if you're an existing client, you've probably had the pleasure of sitting with me for up to 3 hours going through a business diagnostic. I really enjoy them because it's a little bit like therapy. The thing about the business diagnostic is that our clients already know the answers. They've just not been asked the questions yet. In those business diagnostics, there's a little bit of me kind of giving some feedback back during the session, a little bit of me kind of coaching along the way, but a lot of it is just asking the right questions. But it's very time intensive. Like I say, it's a 3-hour workshop and then probably a day of write-ups. So the first thing for us is taking this in kind of two branches. First of all is we capture all that output. So we record it in an AI note taker, which basically does a digital transcript, which is great. And I also capture it in a mirror board. So we can then take that output and feed it into a fairly well-trained AI, first of all. Not trained, fairly well prompted and fed kind of examples of what we want the output to look like, which are the human-generated outputs. and then ask it to pick out kind of to give its analysis based on how it thinks we analyze things. That is never going to be copy and pasted and sent to our clients. That is copied into a slide deck, which we then all review. I still spend a lot of time reviewing those as a team. We review them, and then it gets sent to the clients because it needs to be representative. And that's we have that feedback loop of coming back round and saying, okay, actually, there's a load of crap in there. The interesting thing about doing the work with you guys is AI completely out of nowhere hallucinated that these guys won about 3 awards from the NHS. And I was like, I don't remember that coming up in the conversation. And you ask that question, and AI's like, oh yeah, I don't know where that came from either. And it's like, okay, fine. So you do need to be aware of that. AI will still hallucinate. And to Dennis's point, they will typically hallucinate when they have limited data sets. So sometimes when we go through the business diagnostic, there's some sections that are just completely irrelevant to our clients. So we skip over it. If I feed that almost blank data into the AI, it's just going to make some stuff up. Because it's like, well, you've asked me for this output, I don't see the inputs, so I'm still going to create you some output. And that's where typically you'll see the hallucinations.
Does anyone know why it does that? Just like the most annoying thing about AI is its hallucination and the fact that it's so short. Oh yeah, this is completely true. I definitely researched this.
Yeah.
We say, come on, show me you can work.
Because it's designed to give you prompts, and I see this in human nature all the time, in people, all the time.
You say, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what you want to say.
It is. But again, in the number of people, I've done a lot of. I used to do sales enablement, so I used to teach salespeople how to sell. Without making promises they can't meet. And salespeople are the worst people for that. You ask a salesperson, can you do that? Yeah, I can do that. Happens all the time. Again, I go back to my kids. I ask them, did you take the cookie from the cookie jar? And it's going to be no, isn't it? So it's the way they've been trained is to give you information. They want to please you. That's literally baked into the way LLMs work, is to make sure you're getting a response. Now, you can shortcut that by telling the AI, if you don't know something, tell me I don't know. It's not foolproof. It will still make shit up. Yeah.
I also think like a lot of the LLMs are trained on like the web space, and it doesn't have that much uncertainty because a lot of people, the uncertainty is before they produce the content, so they're thinking about it in their brain, and then it's like I'm writing a LinkedIn post, I'll have a lot of uncertainty, I'll go through like, okay, should I write this, should I write that, and think about that. But the thing that I produce has a lot of certainty. So the LLMs are like trained on all sorts of information, so they're trained on things that are more certain than what we actually produce, because a lot of the information on the internet has already gone through this process.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to the end.
The website, because the responses it gives are based on probability.
Yeah.
So the point
Yeah.
you made is that if there's a lack of data, it will go to the next probable thing. And you can see on this website how it works. You like typing a question, and then it just generates the probability of each word after the next. So even if something's wrong, it's more probable than, and that's why.
I was going to
That's
about the probability versus deterministic settings that you can play with. And I've done this myself to try and get it to know. Follow this process. That I'm really prescriptive about this. Don't go off and invent your own way of doing it. Just stick to the rules.
Yeah.
I wonder whether anyone here has had more experience with that.
So one other thing you've got to remember when you use things like Claude or ChatGPT is that there's a very large hidden system prompt that they send, which is designed to be more useful to the average person. That's not necessarily what you want. So when you create your own systems, you basically have control of that system prompt to a much higher degree, and therefore you can, I saw a leaked version of the Claude prompt, no idea if it's real or not, but it was probably, it looked fairly realistic. It was, pages and pages and pages of instructions that you don't even see when you use Claude, and ChatGPT's got something very similar. Yeah. So there's a mix of the probabilities that are kind of generated during training, and then there's the system prompt and the user prompt that sometimes is visible and sometimes isn't. And those things all kind of merge together with all the other stuff you plug into a prompt to produce the output.
That's interesting. Are there any that you're aware of that have less of a prompt, so there's less baggage, you can be more prescriptive about, carrying out processes?
Well,
the API calls have that. So when you connect it to an API, you don't get that.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
The way I think you need to think about this is there's a massive difference between where the data coming from, right? So if you give, like, in an example, if I give the data in the prompt, right, I'm not asking the LLM to go almost and get data from its learnings, then it's easy for the LLM to go, okay, that's my universe of data. Because in a way, think of LLM as a massive search engine, right? You feed data, and it starts to build these gigantic graphs, right? But the LLM doesn't know, like, really where it begins and ends, because it doesn't track the ownership, it just tracks the relationships between those graphs. And that's why it's easy for an LLM to go on a tangent, because there's a path there, right? And I think, so when people, but also when people say the LLM is just predicting the next word, I think it's doing a disservice to it. Because the way I visualize it is the LLMs create these gigantic, like not just 2 or 3 dimensions, like thousands of dimensions, relationships between the concepts. And then it predicts based on that. The problem is that if you don't give it the grounding data, it's going to use whatever it learns at that moment in time. So in a way, hallucinations are a feature, right?
So are we saying garbage in, garbage out? If
Yeah.
the prompt's not good enough, then
Yeah.
the data you get.
Yeah.
And that's why I like the semantic graphs, because that allows me to really ground it and allows me to debug it. And then eventually, by then, you almost don't need the LLM because you're just connecting concepts, right?
And we've seen that as the different AI models come out to market and get made to public. I may or may not have seen the stories about when Google first did their AI on search results. It had scraped a whole bunch of Reddit data, and Reddit's a lot of fun, and there's a whole load of rubbish in Reddit. So it's like, how do I get my minerals? Eat rocks. It was literally the factual information that Google was telling you because it had scraped that in Reddit. And if you've ever been on Reddit, you know what Reddit's like. 50-50, great, terrible. And I think on that as well, the interesting thing when DeepSeek first came out was that it was showing you its thinking. And I think that was quite a shift in what we've seen with the AIs. To the point where also it exposed some of the pre-programmed stuff in there. So you ask it about Tiananmen Square, and you see it thinking, and then at some point it gets the bit in the prompts where it says, you can't talk about Tiananmen Square because we're China and so on. And then everything gets deleted. And then you get a response along the lines of, oh, it's a great place in China, and you can see these pillars and stuff, And I've got no delusions that the Americans aren't doing something somewhat similar. Yeah.
Have you fed the Miro boards that you did in the Business 360s into the AI?
Yes.
So those have like a lot of physical structure.
Yeah. So
and with those versus like the transcripts.
So there's some interesting things we've done with that. So just on the business diagnostics. So I actually do a combination of the transcript and the Miro board into there, get it to analyze it. But then once I've done the analysis, the thing I'd get it to do is to output as much detail as is reasonably useful into a JSON file, so into a machine-readable output. Which what I can then do is take a whole bunch of those, feed them back into a new chat prompt and say, across all these engagements, analyze common problems that our clients face. And that then loops back into test this against my ICP. So based on my ICP, are the real-world things that we're discovering relevant to what we did on here? Now that's somewhat nuanced to the type of work we do, but I think it's still something that anyone can do, is if you've got some outputs from your clients, is actually feed that back into the engine. And that's where you start creating this programmatic loop around things. But yeah, we absolutely do feed them back out of into that. And the other advantage of creating the JSON output is we can share that. So we can take the entirety of one of those 3-hour workshops and say, right, here's a portable version of that. If I'm happily send yours to you, and you can then use that in an AI to query it. So okay, based on what we said during this workshop, what are some ideas of what we could do? Conscious of time, the other thing we wanted to do with this is create a self-service version of this. It's more tricky to do because you're condensing a 3-hour. We do it virtually, but 3 hours worth of human-led conversation into the same, but with a bunch of questions. And I don't know about you, but I'm not sure there's many people who would be happy to sit down for 3 hours in front of a form answering questions. So there's simply a usability challenge there. Now, it could be that we just break that down because you can have memory in these things. It's like, right, over the next 3 weeks, spend 10 minutes a day going through these questions, and you'll get through that.
But I think the key on that one is to not try to replace the whole process, just try to replace the data collection element of it.
Yes.
that is also in context. So even that form, what I found is that people don't mind too many as long as every question is relevant.
Yes.
As soon as the question is not relevant, that's why you don't like the questionnaire. But every question is related to them before. That makes a big difference. And what you can do is you can then make sure that instead of 3 hours, you can only probably do 1 hour.
Yeah.
Even more interestingly, everybody can be briefed before you arrive at that hour.
Yes.
So you kind of, it's almost like you start where you usually have 2 hours in, but
Yeah.
you start fresh because you're being briefed and you almost know the data collection in advance.
But that's why you also mix in some psychology into that as well. So it's like it's giving continual feedback. So it's not just a 1 hour block. It's right, 10 minutes. Here's a little bit of response based on what you told me so far.
A chatbot is it that handles the first level of questions, then looks
Exactly,
okay,
yeah.
this is a difficult issue, right? The humans take over. It's the
Yeah.
same methodology.
Correct.
Exactly. I'm going to whiz through some of these other ones because again, kind of same sort of concept about feeding in good data and allowing us to be able to allow our clients to be able to easily build sales packs, information memorandums, because these things are just painful and time consuming. There's loads of data into those that goes into those.
We want it to be personalized to the individual.
Yeah, of course it needs to be.
To their language.
It's not just personalised; it's unique to them. It's
Yeah.
entirely unique to them. And then the virtual exit here. So this is an extension of the concept of a virtual Rachel. The virtual Rachel is just the knowledge in Rachel's head. But if we take what we've got, I know you said nine trained exiteers plus we've got a pool of other exiteers that we have access to. They've not been trained to deliver the program, but they've got a whole bunch of knowledge in their heads. It's about formulating that way of extracting that information. And I think that's the next thing. I've been going through a process of, I've got an ongoing conversation with ChatGPT, which was initially was a prompt to say, I want you to extract this information from me. So you need to ask me questions that are relevant to the specific thing I'm doing with this, and I need you to store that, again, in machine-readable format. So every day I can open up that chat and it's right, I'm going to answer 5 more questions. And it's slowly building up a very personalised virtual Chris Kranz that does, it's around go-to-market stuff. At the end of that process, then I have a machine-readable document that I can drop into any AI and say, this is a virtual version of me, this is how you should respond, how you should do things, now let's have a conversation about stuff.
So I do a version of that. Whenever I present with Claude, I do a session of development or strategy.
Yeah.
At the end, I say, can you now summarize everything that, in a way, we learn or we work together here? And then I use that document to feed into the next batch.
Yeah.
So it's almost like I leverage the fact that there was this massive conversation, and then I almost extract this 2, 3, 4, 5, 10-page document out of it with all the learnings and all the outcomes that we agree. And then what's cool about it is that when you start a new chat, in a way you don't have the baggage of all your tangents. You just start with almost like what you have agreed on.
Yeah,
really cool.
but it's also flipping the conversation around. So we're all used to asking AI questions. You go to ChatGPT, ask it questions. Flip that around and get the AI to ask you questions, because and that can be really therapeutic as well. But it's actually really quite eye-opening because again, you know a lot of what you need to know already. You just haven't been asked it in a certain way. It's a little bit like therapy in that way. It's just a structured way of approaching things and asking questions. Speaking of questions.
So, Charles, before we jump into that, we're about T-minus 10 minutes, I think, from closing out. So, really happy that we, use this time for any questions on, not just Chris's, but also Dennis's and Ben's talks from earlier. So, far away. Or don't.
And I guess to prompt you guys is you folks is to have a think about your own use cases. So if you've got questions about specific, if you're thinking, I think I know how I could use this within my business, but I'm not quite sure. Feel free to ask the questions. I don't think there's too much competition in the same room, and we can keep things within the 4 walls. But hopefully, the idea is to help you develop these ideas in your own businesses.
Questions.
Yep.
Biggest bang for buck. If you were sat here now, you've got a business, some experts in the room, 3 areas, biggest bang for your buck that you would put AI into now.
So the one I would say project management, right, and documentation and communication. I think are massive, right? Because in a way, I would argue that these days nobody should arrive at a meeting where the meeting has not been prepared, there's no reading materials, there's no, even the outcome should all be captured. But not in this sort of co-pilot magic thing that, oh, it will come up with the stuff, but it's almost like just making the operationals a lot more efficient. And this is kind of what Amazon does with, if you look at it's called walking backwards documents. But now you can literally create a working backward document, which is a document that tells what you want to do for every single meeting, for every single project, right? If I was meeting at my CISO team now, I would get every single member of my team to have business case, risk analysis, P&Ls, etc. Not because I'm giving them the overhead, but because now they can, right? And what I found, which is very interesting, is I found that if we have a conversation and I send you a 10-page document about what we talked about, you consume that very easily. Because in a way, the concepts are already there. In a way, you're just getting that structure. And then the personalization is very important. So if you then personalize that content to you, it should feel very natural because you're consuming using your analogies, right? So I've done stuff where, for example, like if you have a sarcastic sense of humor, right? I'll give you cybersecurity news or data in the sarcastic sense of humor. If you want bullet points, you have it like that. If you like a fishing or a golfing or a sports or a finance analogy, right? I give you like that. So it's about then personalizing, and I think that you get so much value from it. And on the side of it, you also get value of people now starting to use it and understanding.
So I see it, we're going to make productivity games. What about sales? What tools are out there to improve sales performance?
So there's a ton. Some of my favourite, which are usually most hated within the sales team, is tools like Gong. So Gong, for those that don't know, Gong will record every single call you make, and it will transcribe that. And Gong has been developing their own AI, so you can start looking for some kind of emotion, some sort of, are they talking about the product in an effective way? Are they talking about value? I used to teach a lot of sales methodologies, so I would analyze the Gong calls to see, are they talking the right language? Are they focused on the customer? Very, very, very basic stuff of what's the percentage split of talk time. If your salespeople are talking for 80% on the call, they're not very good salespeople.
You've got a sales manager / trainer.
Yeah. And again, you just can't do that at scale. The last startup I worked at, we scaled to 130 salespeople. There were 20 sales managers kind of worldwide. And they were busy managing their sales team, not looking at sales calls. We were an enablement team of 4 at our peak, and we could not manage listening to those calls. What I could do is set up some canned searches and get a feed of, okay, here's the 3 calls you should listen to today, and here's the sections of those calls to listen to.
But if you look at being prepared for meetings, right? Have you used ChatGPT or have you used the deep research ones? Have you used those? Okay, so you can now go. Let's say you wanted to sell to the Grafter, right? You can literally go to ChatGPT. This is the deep research one, right? It's the more expensive one. I think Claude has now, and Timmy has it. You can literally say, give me a business review and analysis about the Grafter, right? And put it from the angle of what you want to say. Give an example, like I send this thing to Rachel, where I literally went and said, look, this is me, this is Rachel, both LinkedIn profiles. Give me first of all, find our history.
Rachel.
Well, this is not about the whole stocky, creepy thing. This is just about saying, you can spend a amount of time doing research. But what is now they have done, especially these research notes, is they'll go out and they'll give you a 10-page document, right? But I guarantee you that today, if you do that to your company, the document you're going to get is better than your website. Right? So imagine, what I think every salesperson should do now is they should do that for every company, even for every individual that they meet. Because it means that before they arrive at the meeting, they are briefed. They know what they're going to interact and they know how to communicate.
To counterpoint that, if I gave a 10-page document to a salesperson to read before a call, they would tell me to fuck off. They would not read it. So you need a way of summarizing that as well. So this is where you create you blend this with personas. So you say, right, this is the person who I'm about to speak to. This is what I think they care about. First of all, analyze their company, and now give me the 3 things I need to focus this conversation on, based on their persona, based on my product, based on what I care about, based on what I'm trying to sell, and analyze that.
So in the good old days where you were a good telesale person and you did a fact find,
yep,
and you found those details out,
yep,
before you even started pitching,
yep,
what you're actually saying now is you can use technology to do that, to support your sales process?
Within reason. So the technology is absolutely limited in the scope of what it does. One thing, so I used to do a lot of software sales and there was a lot of overlap in open source. One thing I'd always tell the sales team is go and look at people's GitHub profiles, because you'll see what they're involved in, what they're doing, what they're interested in. The AIs today are doing it much more in a formal, the way we used to do things, which is go to their website, look at their latest, SEC filings, whatever it is, and give me the response from those. It's
that
a very
works together, right? That
Yeah.
You don't need new tools. In fact, I would even argue that you have to use it to see it, right? But that's not even like future-proof. Like, that's not yourself. That is already, that workflow I'm describing, we talk about, already exists today in the latest version of Claude, of ChatGPT,
So
etc.
we're saving money, we're delivering sales. I like IP value. So Ben, I know what you talked about.
Yeah.
How you'll develop your products and make sure you're delivering or creating IP value.
Yeah, so I think that's about the granularity of how you put these systems together. You know, you could go and take something off the shelf for the sales enablement piece, right? Pretty much any CRM that you have right now will do that kind of out the box, and it will do that middle of the bell curve, you know, as a product. To turn that into an asset, it needs to be connected to the rest of your internal systems, and you need to be very clear about the bits that you own. So if you were to spend a bunch of time in one of the LLM models and build up this kind of very comprehensive replacement system prompt, for example, that would be your IP. You know, the prompts that drive the business diagnostic, that's Grafter's IP. That's stuff that is completely separate from any LLM platform. You know, you could take that and you could run it against Claude or ChatGPT, or, you know, let's say down the line, OpenAI suddenly realizes they're hopelessly overcapitalized, nobody wants to fund them again, they go pop, and the whole industry collapses. Well, now you've got this AI thing that doesn't work because you built it in their playground. If you've kept the prompts, worse comes to worse, and if you realise it's happening first, you go and buy a bunch of GPUs, you run it yourself, right? So you have defensible IP in the models, the semantic graphs you build, the prompts.
Business resilience translated into these new models.
Yeah, I mean that's you separating what you control from what you don't control, and being able to switch at will. So there's a platform I'm playing with at the moment called Samba, and there's another one called Grok with a Q. Both of those are alternative inference offerings, and they use different models than they use the open source models. They're 10 times quicker. You know, the type of deep research that you could do in Claude, you pay Claude $200 a month. You pay ChatGPT $200 a month, and it will do deep research, and it's like, ooh, wow! You can type a prompt in, and it goes away and spends half an hour doing this research, and it's a subscription for $200 a month. Samba is an alternative inference, and just probably out of spite, they built their own open research, deep research, open source thing that runs on top of their infrastructure that takes 30 seconds to do exactly the same thing, right? Which is open source, which you can basically copy, take, improve, make your own, build it into your own internal infrastructure. So one of the things I didn't mention is the infrastructure that we build at Mission Control, every little bit of that is open source, because then it becomes something that can be cloned into the client company, and it's not, you know, we are the kind of shepherds of that, and we help build it, but it's theirs from day one, because that's where the boundary is for me. Building something that expresses your IP, you need to own it.
I think two additions on the IP piece is, I think don't overlook business process as a valuable IP. So just the way you use the tools. Forget the fact that AI is one of those tools. There's just the way you use Salesforce and the internet and all these different things. That could be unique to you and what you do. The second side of it is I've worked for a number of companies they sell an open source offering, and they have zero IP from a technical level. They've got some very cool products, but they've released them as open source. Their IP is held in with how many customers they've got. So if you've got a really slick sales process and you've got 5,000 customers, potentially that's worth a lot more than some physical IP in a traditional sense that you own.
So one of the things, I think there's a massive opportunity now while you're doing some of these, is that there's now the ability for you to create these micro companies, right, that have very little overheads, that focus on doing one thing really right, that you get to a certain degree of ARR or MRR, and then sell it. right? So I think some of your IP might be a person of something you're very good at, so you can literally say, cool, I'm going to product it, right? But then if you spin up as a separate company in a way, it sounds simple, but it's not. But it's all about, can you have something that adds value? Can you do it without a lot of fixed costs? Can you get users? Will the users pay for it, right? And that's a simple connection of the users get value, there's a sweet spot where they pay for it. And as long as your costs are very little, as soon as they pay, you're in a profitable state, then the question is how many can you get of those? You get that to a certain amount of value. Well, look, if you got 1 million ARR, that's already, from a valuation point of view, that's already 5 to 7 million or more, right? Company, right? But I think in the past, like we were saying before, a lot of this stuff you couldn't do, or you had to build a massive engineering team.
3, 5 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but the bottom line is that you need an engineering team, right? This is what I don't think a lot of people talk about. You absolutely need to have good engineers, right? Good architects in your environment, right? Because they're the ones who build the foundation to make this scale, right? Without that, in cybersecurity, I had an engineering team in my team, right? Because we built stuff. We were not just consumers of cybersecurity technology. And this was before the whole GenAI stuff. So you need to have your own engineering team. The good news is that in the past, that engineering team will cost you a ridiculous amount of money. The jump from service to product. Before GenAI, it was literally millions and millions, right? To do something that was kind of quite brittle, probably. And yes, there might be a bit of a moat, but it was very hard. I think now you have the ability to, in a very kind of skunk works kind of environment, create a very focused, smallish engineering team that you can say, here's a service that I offer today, productize that, right? And before that was just not possible. Again, the key is make sure you staff that team, not with ML experts that the first thing they want to do is build a model. Staff that, ironically, you want to staff it even with non-technologists, people that understand business processes, right? But you do need the architects. Without technology architecture and good engineering, that's where a lot of people are failing. Because they go, hey, let's fund this, let's get some AI experts, and they forget that the fundamentals are even more important, right, than before.
And there's some great consultancies that can help you develop an MVP for that, get you off the ground.
I'm sorry, but we do need to bring it to a close, mainly because I've got a meeting. And I've got a feeling that we could probably carry on all day. But really appreciate everybody coming along this morning. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to Tom and team for hosting us.